50 grand for a month. And I was like, whoa, like, Jesus, like, is that actually how much it's going to cost? Like 50 grand.
You know, ultimately, I had to pick up the phone to the police and explain, you know, this is the situation.
I always thought, like, let me just put this money in rather than me taking it out. If I leave the money in the stock market, I'll make more money.
Recently was a guest checked into the property and sent an image of a pubic hair on the bed.
Today, I think we're going to talk about, as traders and as people who are trying to become financially free, a big thing is investing the money that you make, whether that's through trading, whether that's through your job, whatever it is. And a big thing that people invest in is properties. And who better to have on the podcast than the property man himself, Hamza?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Zach. The first one was just so fun. We had to do it again.
Exactly. So today, let's talk about like how to invest in properties. So you being in the property industry, like obviously you have a lot of experience. Let's talk about like, also a big thing is like when people talk about properties, there's a lot of like people don't want to invest into properties as such because there's such a big barrier to entry. But then in your industry, I don't feel like, because obviously you're into rent to rent, right? So you're not necessarily laying out like massive sums of money, right? So let's talk about how you got into properties at such a young age and how you gained the respect of landlords starting out.
Most definitely. So in 2024, we're sitting in now, you don't need huge sums of capital to get into property, and leveraging that to create a business is exactly what I thought I should do. To be fair, I started out with around £5,000 in property, and I tried to use other people's money, other people's resources to build a business that creates cash flow. So with the rent-to-rent model, now especially, what you can do is instead of having all of this capital tied up in one place, you can rent properties and then rent them again with the landlord's permission. And as long as you're compliant with the legal regulations, what you can do is sublease. And I found this model to work quite well for me. And it's not easy. Of course, nothing's easy. But to develop a network and at such a young age, you have to show yourself to be credible with landlords. That's exactly how I done it.
But like somebody watching this might be like, well, if you don't have a track record, but you want to get into properties, like how do you go about finding landlords and like how do you show them that you're serious about re-renting the property without having a track record?
Of course, when you're in your early 20s or younger or in your 20s, it's not difficult to get the trust of landlords. You have to show yourself to be credible. So in the very beginning, I had to work a lot on myself. I had to work on my communication, and I had to meet landlords in person rather than over the phone. So that's kind of what set me apart and how I was able to generate trust of landlords and developing the relationships with landlords to the extent to which they were able to give me more properties that they had on their portfolio. And I think that's very important. As a landlord, you want your rent to be paid on time. You want your property to be maintained well. And you don't want any issues. You want a stress-free life. You don't want complaints from neighbours or complaints from the council. So if you can tick all of those boxes, the landlords will be very happy. And down the line, you never know, they can give you the keys to more of their properties.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I remember like a little story from like when you got your first property, because it wasn't actually a rent to rent, right? Like your first property, you saved up and got, most people spend their student loan on like going out, you know, getting drinks, whatever. And for you, I remember you got your student loan, and how did you get about getting your first property? Like, tell them that story, because I think that's really inspirational.
At university, yeah, this was my first property. I used the student maintenance loan. I maxed it out, and I saw that as kind of good debt because it's only above a certain threshold you have to start paying that back. I think it's 9%, and after you're earning above £26,000 a year. And if you're above 50, it gets written off. And I saw that, and I saw the money, and I thought, okay, if it's £11,000 a year for 3 years, that's £30,000 that I can use to save up. And why not use that in property or a deposit for a house? When I went to uni as well, it was during COVID, so my exams and timetables were more relaxed because everything was online. So I had a part-time job as well as a bartender. I used the money, saved up money from there, used the maintenance loan, and obviously in London, house prices are very expensive. So the only place I could afford was somewhere up north. So I looked into Blackpool properties, and not even a fixed property. It was a completely broken property that I bought. It was for about £50,000. We spent about another £40,000 or £50,000 renovating the property. And as it stands today, it's worth about 180,000, and it produces £1,000 in rent every month. So that was my first experience in property at 19 years old. And since then, I've then refinanced that property, took all of the money we reinvested out, and then I put that into another project in property as well.
Yeah.
Having started this business, I then, instead of long letting that property, I've started to short let that property. So I put that property on Airbnb as well. So the mortgage for that property is only £350, and where I'm charging £100 a night in revenue, it does make £3,000 a month. So that was my first ever property. It wasn't with the rent-to-rent scheme. It was actually the BRRR scheme, the buy, refurbish, refinance, and repeat.
Wow. So like your story is like literally just with the student finance that you received, you've grown like a massive, almost like an empire. Like you've got so many properties now, and from that you leveraged it, and you've just, I think the way you refinance the property is just inspirational. Like, and then rather than like buying one property with the refinance amount that you received, you then looked at the rent-to-rent scheme, and then you can approach so many landlords because like on average, what would be say like the average amount it is to get a property to rent-to-rent?
So mainly I focus in London. On average, a property would be around £2,500 per calendar month to rent out from a landlord. And that property would produce £1,000 to £2,000 on an average seasonal month in profit after you take in cleaning costs, after you take in linen costs and maintenance costs, and also commission from the OTAs, Airbnb and Booking.com. So where you can have, multiple properties and you can build a system and have that system automated, that's really where you can scale the business. And once you start reinvesting the profits back into the business, that's really where you can scale.
Yeah, but I mean, like, not everybody watching the podcast might not have like the accessibility to like get a property in central London, right? Some people might be, like you said, like up north. Your first property was up north. So like when you get the property and source the property, what are like the key benefits, like the key things you look at that makes a property successful? Like obviously London's self-explanatory, right? Like if you get one in Kensington or whatever, like in Bond Street, like there's massive amounts of tourist attraction there. But if you were going to look outside of London and at properties that might not be as much, so you said £2,500 a month, which isn't that much in the grand scheme of things, but for some people that might be a lot, right? So what else would you look at like outside of London, and what makes a property successful outside of London?
So it would be tourist attractions, places like Manchester, Birmingham, even Brighton and Blackpool. Blackpool is near a beach, for example, and people do, even in the UK, go on escapes or excursions to Blackpool. So those areas are slightly more affordable, and the rent-to-rent model does work in those areas as well, and the rent is more affordable. You do make probably less profit because there's less risk involved up front in terms of the rent. However, it still works. The model is so scalable and beneficial right now that people are doing it in every destination possible.
Yeah, scalable is a big thing. Like in like trading industry, in the Amazon FBA industry that I'm familiar with and trading, scaling in that regard. So if we talk about trading, scaling would be basically increasing the amount you invest, maybe increasing your portfolio of markets that you trade in. But in the property industry, if a trader or somebody with money is looking into getting into the industry, once you get that first property, how do you scale from there? Is it simply just getting more properties, or do you look at like maybe going down the development route, or like how do you scale the best in the property industry?
In the very beginning, it is about work ethic. It is about having failures and a lot of mistakes that you make and lessons. And what I found as well when I started was some properties weren't making a profit because I invested into the wrong area, or it was not really the right price. I maybe had paid too much rent to the landlord. So once you've found a good area at a good rent, then I find that you just want to expand on that and do more of what's working. So, for example, in the beginning, I was getting flats in Harlesden, which was a very rough area. And those properties, I had so much headache and literally no return or reward for that headache. So then I changed the strategy and I went to Mayfair in luxury areas close to Paddington, Knightsbridge, Kensington. And those properties were much more in demand and we were able to price them higher. So we just focused on acquiring more properties in the same place. And once there was a handful of properties, we had to create a system for cleaners, a system for the linen, a system for the laundry. So our cleaners at the moment, we use a self-storage unit that's nearest to the property, and they pick up the clean linen from the self-storage and they take it to the property and they return back to the storage with the dirty linen. And every week there is a linen delivery company that takes the dirty linen and picks up the clean linen. So that whole process is automated, as well as the fact that we use lock boxes at every property and we have automatic messages sent out to every guest, which kind of reduces the workload and makes everything more efficient and systemized. And having that system in place was allowing me to focus on the growth and acquiring more properties, the more important tasks, such as speaking to landlords and maintaining properties. So it's very important in the beginning that you have a system in place and you automate everything. And as well as that, it's so easy, especially when you're at a young age, to see the profits coming in and you want to take some of that out for enjoyment. But I reinvested everything back into the business and increased the number of properties slowly and slowly.
Yeah, I mean, at the start of the conversation or the answer that you gave, you talked about like your first maybe less expensive area. What was the area again? Sorry,
Harlesden.
Yeah, Harlesden. You had like headaches and stuff. So before you went into the higher end areas, in trading and other industries that I've worked in, for example, like a headache might be like CPI news doesn't go your way, or like maybe an unfortunate world event occurs, stuff like that. And in Amazon FBA and in like the e-commerce, you might get a bad review, or your product might be not what you expected, and so on. But in like this industry, like you said, you got headaches in Harlesden. What sort of headaches would you get like when you were in an area like that?
So many. We had neighbours complaining about parties. I think at one point even the police got involved because there was a group of 20 people who came in and were doing drugs, laughing gas, smoking weed, smoking ganja. It was very, very erratic. And, ultimately I had to pick up the phone to the police and explain, this is the situation. And it was really then that got me thinking, this area is not the one. So I learned from that lesson, and you have to bear a loss, but you have to stay focused and disciplined and keep going, stay resilient. So, I could have let that stop me and just, shut down and maybe gone back into a corporate role. Or, I could have taken it as a lesson and come back even stronger with the lessons that I learned. Apart from the parties, even now to this day, we still have problems, but that exists in every business.
Yeah.
We have mouse come in, we have to have pest control. We have neighbours complain about properties to the landlords. Some properties, the landlords aren't happy with the neighbours complaining so much, and we genuinely can't do much about that they take the properties away and we have to find new properties. So it's all about going through the process. And now, when you have multiple properties, I know some of my mentors and some individuals in the industry who have 50 to 100 properties. So on a day-to-day basis, they probably have 10 phone calls to their team, explaining that there's either a mouse or there's neighbours complaining or the landlord's taking the property away. So in the beginning, I took every stress very deeply and it affected my mood a lot. But you learn as you have more stress, that's when you can tolerate more success. So your stress tolerance is building up as you go along, and that's allowing you to be more successful.
Yeah. I mean, in the industry as well, like I feel like there's a bit of a lot of people that aren't involved in Airbnb and like see like the growth of Airbnb so rapidly. I think they have a bit like a toxic view, because I do read a lot online about Airbnbs, booking.com and all that. A lot of people are getting involved. And some people view it as like pushing the prices and rents up a lot. And like a lot of people want the government or like the council and stuff to really like buckle down and stop people doing the rent-to-rent scheme as much. Do you think like from that standpoint, and from people that are just trying to rent normally or trying to buy property normally, does it actually push the prices up for these people, or is it just what do you think?
There is a lot of stigma around short rentals, especially with Labour coming in. They're enforcing a lot of regulations, and even before they came in, existed a 90-day rule in certain areas of London. However, if you look at the way the tourism industry is working and the London economy is going, these short rentals are actually facilitating tourism and helping the economy grow. Whilst I do understand, these short rentals existing are pushing prices up to some sort of extent, most people don't prefer to stay in a hotel, or some people don't prefer to stay in a hotel nowadays, because especially the way the city is changing, you see the crimes going up. People want their private property. They want their keys to their own place. And someone coming for 3 to 6 months, where else are they going to stay if it's not an Airbnb? It works out cheaper than a hotel. And, you can't really come into the country for 3 to 6 months and stay in a hotel. So the Airbnbs, they have to exist to some sort of extent. Yes, if there's too many, it can cause a problem. But is it also helping the problem of this high demand and low supply of properties in London?
Yeah. I mean, I got to say as well, like, from watching you do your business and growing it, like, as someone who does rent to rent, I can say that Hamza is actually so, like, nice in terms of, like, if somebody or a friend, or, like, if you see somebody that might be, like, less fortunate and needs a place to stay, like, Hamza's, like, giving people places to stay for free. Like, I remember, like, the other day, like, somebody came to you and was like, yo, like, they were struggling and stuff, and you might not talk about it a lot, like, on social media and stuff, but, like, I gotta say, like, you do help a lot of people out, and even if it's not giving it for free, but if you see, like, a family that come in, you give them discounts, or, like, you make them feel welcome, or if there's a problem, like, I remember one time, one of your customers had a problem in the Airbnb, and you booked them a hotel. Like, you're always so nice, and, like, you always build, like, really good relationships with your customers. So I've got to say, like, that is admirable, and I think that's a big part as to why you've found so much success, because, like, it's just amazing, like, the sort of relationships that you build. And I think that's also why you have that, like, constant relationship where your customers come back. So, like, if they stay in Christmas or summer or whatever in the peak seasons, they always tend to, like, I see the same people come back to your properties, or you're going to meet up with them for dinner and stuff like that. I think that's really good trait.
Certainly. The long-term vision for us is to get mainly direct bookings, to have our own website, and to have repeat customers and repeat clients come back to us every year. So we want to kind of cut out the booking.com and Airbnb entirely. Of course, that won't be fully possible, but to a certain extent, we want to operate our business with a handful of selective clients every year who we accommodate to a high standard.
Yeah. A bit of, like, a conversation about, like, from my standpoint, it's a bit of a different topic, but, like, I remember when I was trading, I don't know if you found this as well, but, like, in the future, I might, and I see this a lot of millionaires and even some billionaires, and you see, like, shorts, or you see, like, YouTube videos of them, and some people don't know, like, when to stop in terms of, like, when is it enough? Like, what's enough money? Do you know what I mean? And, like, I think I sort of fell into that trap a little bit when I was trading, and, like, I would trade, and then from a trading standpoint, rather than taking my money out and spending it or investing it in property, like we're talking about properties, I always thought, like, let me just put this money in rather than me taking it out. If I leave the money in the stock market, I'll make more money, because I was always, like, I had that mindset of, like, what's the point of me taking it out? If I make 5% on everything, it's going to be more money, you know? I didn't have that sort of discipline to sort of take my money out and stop growing and, like, stop. And that's how I found that I had my biggest losses, like, not knowing when to stop. And, like, I see a lot of really, really, really rich individuals. They sort of, like, don't have that sort of willpower to just, like, to stop. Do you know what I mean? Like, what they always want more. Like, they could buy, like, 3 private jets, you know what I mean? But they're always wanting more. Like, how do you know when enough's enough? Like, how do you know when you've scaled your situation to a point where you're going to be happy and you're going to feel successful?
I think that there has to be a point where you find satisfaction. Otherwise, you'll never be happy. If you're always wanting more, then it turns into greed in a sense. And I think there's a book that we were talking about, Psychology of Money, that explains the story very well. And I won't explain the story, but essentially the moral was that the guy was already very wealthy and he was trying to chase the next million through insider trading, and he got caught. And even just to make a quick £1,000,000, which he didn't need, he ended up in prison. So he was too greedy, and you have to find a time where you're happy with what you're doing. And that's why I think it's about quality over quantity.
Yeah. Because, like, you know, yes, like the last time we had an episode, we talked about, like, wanting to change people's lives. And I think that's a big point and a big part of, like, what's motivating us. I think changing people's lives for you, like, in that hospitality field, that's a good motivation to have. Like, but and then again, like, from your standpoint, what is your, like, sort of goal, or what's your point where you're going to, like, sit down and you're going to say, like, you know what? I've achieved X, Y, and Z, and I'm proud of myself, and now I'm going to just take that step back. I've achieved all of this. What's your end goal for you?
For me, in the next 5 to 10 years, I would love to have operations set up in UK. That's across cities, London, Birmingham, Manchester. I'd love to have operations set up in Dubai and Miami. And maybe we'll see where that goes, maybe even more across the globe. Philippines, and there's some cabins around the world that look very nice too, to love to do something like that. But I think the ultimate goal for me would be to have an operation that is fully systemized, an operation where even if I wasn't hands-on involved, I can leave the business, come back a year later, and it would have doubled in size. And that would be through the use of employees, highly trained employees, and a structure set up, whether that's legal, human resources, finance. And most of these employees would be Philippine-based, and some would be office-based in London and Dubai, a sales team that would call out to landlords, and also a team that would go into the properties and refurbish them and furnish them. And the whole process would be fully automated.
Yeah, that's a good point. The thing as well about building a team, I know you just touched on that topic, and I think that's a really good point. When I was building Hera, and I'm still in the process of doing so, when I reached out to the agencies that were coding my website and well, the agencies that were doing the marketing for me, I've reached out to so many people, and the one I eventually chose was one. The agency was young individuals like me and you, and they were so motivated, and they were motivated to a point where, like, for example, with the marketing aspect, rather than being like, hey, Zach, like, give us this retainer and we'll market for you every month and you pay X amount, they said to me, listen, we want your company to grow. And it was a big point for me because with my company growing through their marketing, I knew their company would grow. So the point I'm trying to make is really important from a business standpoint and from a CEO standpoint to ensure that the team that you build all want the same objective, and that's to grow, rather than working on these retainers and, like, paying all this stuff up front and all that. Like, obviously people need to make money, and this is a company, like, these young individuals are here to do a business, but it's also from a standpoint where it's like ensuring that everybody's on the same page. Like, that's really important in business, whether you're in the trading industry, the prop firm industry, the Amazon FBA industry, the property industry with your team. Ensuring everybody grows with the company, I think, is a really big point.
Culture is everything. I used to work at a startup where there was about 6 people in the office. And from working in that startup, I noticed a lot of benefits and also drawbacks. So the drawback was that the company hired very quickly. So let's say they had 6 employees and all of a sudden they're hiring 6 more. That's going to completely change the culture of the business. And that's a lesson I learned through vicariously being there in that office. So the 6 previous employees were very motivated, self-motivated, self-disciplined. They'd come in every day at 6 a.m. into the office and just pitch train, ready to hit the phones. And the 6 new employees that came in were graduates, and they took a very laid-back approach. They were less hungry, less ambitious. So automatically, the culture of the office had shifted. There was already a dynamic there, and the dynamic shifted. So that affected the overall results that the company was producing.
Yeah, that's a good point. It reminds me of like when we used to be in school, and like, do you remember when like you would see like rugby? That like I used to play rugby back in school, and like you would see like the rugby team, and the coaches always used to like make you look up to those players. Like the goal at the end was to be like in the first team. Like we always, all my mates used to watch like the first team play, and we always wanted to do and improve our rugby because we knew eventually like maybe we would get to play in that first team. And like it just reminded me of that a little bit, like that sort of idea of like almost like looking up to like what you could be. Like these people have achieved so much through training like relentlessly. They were always in the gym, they were always working on their craft, they were always together. Because like rugby's, and even in the workplace, being surrounded by like your friends, and like it's like healthy competition in a way. Like I think being competitive is really important in and out of like the workplace. And that was a good point like that you made. Let's touch on like a little bit about like mentorship. I know we talked a little bit. You used a word in the conversation already. What's your like opinion on mentorship? Because I see a lot of people now and young entrepreneurs are all selling like courses, or like massive amounts of money is being spent and made on courses. And I've never, from my standpoint, I can say I've never bought a course, and I've never really like had a mentor. So it'll be interesting to talk about that, and like what are your opinions, especially in the property industry, about having a mentor, and what are the benefits and drawbacks?
You see a lot of courses going around nowadays, whether it's property or whether it's anything from even growing a plant. But the truth is that I actually bought a course in property, and from my experience, I can tell you that it was not beneficial to me. But what it did do is it made me put my money where my mouth is. So having spent, let's say, £3,000 on that course, I now felt like I had an obligation to do something, whether or not it's from the knowledge of the course or just kind of pursuing things and just diving in the deep end. So that's exactly how I got involved in property. And talking about mentorship, I think it is very important to have a mentor, because it can help you, have that decades worth of experience just in a few sentences, and that value can really shape how you're going to use your business. For example, with me, I used to have, in the very early days, a problem with getting bookings in my properties. So I asked my mentor, okay, how is it that we can, increase our bookings and increase the price of our bookings and therefore the revenue? And he helped me with so many tips that was absolutely invaluable. For example, the pictures of a property, the photographer. He even linked me with the photographer's number. He works on behalf of Airbnb. So this photographer is highly trained to take high-level pictures. And single-handedly, the pictures are what decides if a client was to book a property or not. So not only this, but the listing optimization, tricks on how to, speed up the commission that Booking.com takes. So they show you on number 1 or 2 pages. And that alone, from having that mentor, was really what allowed me to encounter a lot of success early on.
Yeah, so obviously I know you've told me, and I actually saw the person you bought the course from. Obviously we don't have to name drop, but so the amount that you spent, are you open to tell the audience how much you spent on the course?
£3,000 sterling.
So from £3,000 sterling, would you think that the course that you bought has translated to being the contents in the course was worth £3,000, or do you think it was more from a standpoint of like you were now obligated, like you're £3,000 in, like you just got to go for it now, like you spent all that money?
It was more my mindset that shifted once buying the course. It was more of a mental standpoint.
Yeah.
If I was to say, was there £3,000 worth of value in that course? No, not at all. But indirectly, what has happened is it translated into myself becoming the version of myself that I wanted to be.
Yeah. I mean, I do look at a lot of these courses, and like I see a lot of people selling courses. I think a big part as to like why I would even consider one is the sort of community that comes with buying the course. And like I see like you buy a course, for example, a property course, and you get introduced to like loads of people that have like similar mindsets to you. Like I don't know if that was the case for you, but I know somebody that has purchased a course in the trading industry, and it helps him with trading, getting into trading, and the signals and what to look out for and stuff. And he met some of his like best friends through buying that course. Like if it wasn't for that course, he wouldn't have had that like introduction to the community. He wouldn't have met those friends. And I think that would be like the only sort of reason why I would buy a course. Is sort of obviously learning is part of it, part of the course as well, but also sort of surrounding yourself by other like-minded people in the industry, like that's invaluable. Like the importance of being surrounded by other people with the same mentality as you. So that's probably the only reason I would go down that route, to be honest.
100%. You have to do your research. You cannot buy a course from any Joe Blogs on the street. And to be fair, I would say investing in yourself is the best thing that you can do. Buying a course and putting yourself in an environment that's a community of like-minded people is a very clever thing, because networking is the most important and quickest way to grow a business, in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, you've met some like really, and you've had other people that you've spoken to that obviously you didn't buy a course from, but you've had people that have mentored you. Again, I won't name drop any of them, but they've taught you so much from like a standpoint where it's just like they're generally nice people. But then sometimes I feel like in certain industries, especially when I got into the prop firm industry, like some people try to take advantage of like your inexperience in the industry. And that's a big thing, I think, no matter what, whether you're getting into properties, whether you're getting into trading, whether you're starting another business, when you approach people to help you, I think a big problem is like in any industry, like people would just try and take advantage of your inexperience. And did you ever find that like when you went into like the rent-to-rent industry, did you ever find like people with a little bit maybe more power and more experience and more money ever try to take advantage of you or try to like make you spend your money?
I think it's definitely out there, and I think you always have to be switched on. You have to include a bit of street smart to the operation as well. Even walking down the street, nowadays someone can snatch your phone at any point.
Yeah.
So you can't let people take you for granted. You have to approach with confidence, even if you have nothing. It's always best to invest in yourself, invest in the way you speak, and hold your ground. If you have confidence and you go up to a mentor and you speak to them in a way where you're very serious, and they know that you are not the type of person to get taken advantage of, then simply they cannot. And don't let yourself be sold so easily. There's a lot of people out there that can get promised the world, where the course operator makes an offer so good that you can't say no. For example, in my course, maybe I was sold to actually in the past, he said that I'll give you all of these resources. I'll give you this Excel sheet that will calculate budgets for your projects. I will give you this network. I will add you to the group chat where we will speak about property. And this is 5,000 worth of material, which I'll give you for £3,000. And if you still don't like it, I will give you your money back.
Yeah.
And the offer for me was so good that I just couldn't say no. And then included in that, he said, okay, you can pay in an installment plan, pay it every month. And it making it even more affordable for me. So an offer on the table was so good that I just couldn't refuse it. And looking back at that, I'm glad it happened, because if that happens at any point again in my life, I'm going to have my walls higher.
Yeah. I mean, that actually reminds me of like before we started this podcast. So I was on a meeting with a marketing agency, and just coincidentally, they started talking about podcasts. And I was like, hold on, like podcasts, like this could be really beneficial to the industry I'm about to enter, this Hera thing. And I was talking to them, and eventually we got to like the quotation of how much a podcast will cost. And this was the first time I'd even been talking about podcasts. So I had no experience in the industry. I didn't know how much it would cost. I didn't know how much like time it would take, or how to speak on the camera, or like what conversations had to be had. And they told me, look, listen, Zach, we can find you people to talk on the podcast. We can get hosts for you. We can find the guests. We'll book all of the studios for you. And I was like, oh, this is too good to be true. Like, because obviously they knew I didn't know what was going on. And then they quoted me, and it was like 50 grand for a month. And I was like, whoa, like, Jesus, like, is that actually how much it's going to cost? Like 50 grand for a podcast? Like, and so I researched it a little bit, and rather than just jumping into the deal straight away, I found that like these people were just trying to like take advantage of me, because I had no idea, like, no matter how old you are or who you are, there people out there that are just going to like see that you have inexperience in somewhere, and they will just try and exploit you for having a lack of knowledge. But then as well, like talking about being like the host of a podcast and me paying somebody else to do it, I think from a trust standpoint, me coming out as the CEO of Hera and of the prop firm, I hope it helps build a lot of trust for my firm. Like, you guys know that it's a serious firm. Like, we want to have longevity, and it's also from like a relatable standpoint. Like, you guys, and I know like what a good prop firm is, because I'm a trader, you guys are all traders, and you guys sort of have that connection with me where like all the traders can sort of communicate with me, and I can hopefully tailor the best prop firm in the industry and in the market. But yeah, so let's talk a bit more about you and your industry. So what about can you share some like any like creative or any strategies that you used to like find landlords? Because obviously, like, from a standpoint where these people that are watching might not have any contacts in the property industry, right? These guys might be traders, whatever, however they make their money. Now they want to enter this property industry, yeah? How would they find contacts, or how would they go about finding their first property if they don't know any landlords or anything about the industry?
There's a lot of ways to do it nowadays. And the one I find most effective use of my time would be to pick up the phone and call landlords. Because if you think about it, picking up the phone, you can just stay in one room, and from call after call after call after call, you can access landlord, whether he's in Manchester, whether he's on holiday, and you've managed to speak to him, or he's in London, and from that landlord, if it's a good conversation, he might point you in the right direction. So the best use of my time is actually on the phone, and I think that improves the way you kind of have your pitch as well. You're improving what you need to say, and in the beginning, I would definitely suggest picking up the phone. And obviously finding the numbers is part of the lead sourcing. That can be done on Open Rent, and also perhaps talking to agents as well. Whilst most agents on Open Rent, Rightmove and Zoopla aren't going to be open to rent as much, there are still some smaller agents on Rightmove and Zoopla that you can develop a relationship with. And once you've had that relationship with an agent, they already have an existing database of thousands of landlords. So you can set up an arrangement with the agent whereby you offer them a sourcing fee for every time they refer you over a landlord. So that was quite an effective use of my time in the very beginning. I'd say apart from that, the strategies of going to property networking events is very good. And also just kind of thinking outside of the box, you know, walking into the office of a estate agency or talking to someone and asking them, how did it happen? And just connecting dots.
Yeah, that's a good point. And you know, we talked about like people choosing their first property, and like you mentioned how like location's a big thing, and like having like maybe local tourist attractions, so you may have like larger occupancy rates. But like when you actually choose a property and you're like, okay, this is the one, regardless of like where it is and the tourist attractions around it, when you physically step foot in the property, what do you look out for? Like, is there any certain things that you say, okay, it has this is good, it has that, it has this? Like, what, not being, for example, these people might not have any experience in like properties. What do you look for like that makes a property like worth buying or worth renting?
I'd say number one is location. You could have the best property, but it could be in a very badly situated location, not close to any stations, not close to any bus stops, or even close to a sea or something. That's not going to help. So location is number one. Then when you walk into the property, you want to check the hallway. You want to check if there's a porter, if there's a concierge. That's very important, because if there's a porter, that means that when your guests are coming in, they're going to encounter a porter or a concierge. So the concierge or porter would have to know what's going on in the property as well. You don't want to put your money in a property where, you know, you've paid all of the deposits, all of the rent, set it all up, and then when you start the operation, they start seeing guests with suitcases coming in, and all of a sudden you're at a massive loss. So definitely look if the building is private, if it has a private entrance, if it has a lift. And then once you're actually in the property, you want to see, is this property, does it have potential? If it doesn't have the looks of a modern chic place, then it does at least have potential for you to, at a good value budget, prepare the place nicely for Airbnb.
Yeah, that's a good point. And so for example, as traders, and for any traders like watching this podcast and thinking to themselves like, okay, I actually want to get to this and I want to scale a property hobby as well, or like a side hustle, or get into property. with trading, like you don't really like necessarily need employees. Like when you're a day trader or you trade, you sort of do it off your own back. Like you revise or you learn markets and you learn strategies and stuff like that. But when you're going into like property industry, a big thing, and you talked about it becoming self-sufficient, you actually might need to hire somebody, or you might need a VA or something like that. In trading, it's not really like that. You don't really need a VA for trading as such, or you don't need employees, or you don't have to answer like daily messages and stuff like that. So in terms of employment, because some people might get into this industry, like somebody might watch this and say, okay, you know what, I've got a little bit of money now, I want to get into this, I want to start renting to rent. What about getting your first employee, and like how important is it to get a VA or to get somebody sourcing properties for you, or how do you look for an employee and how do you interview them and stuff like that?
Ultimately, if you want to scale your business, you have to employ employees. And for me, I found virtual assistants in Philippines to be very lucrative for me. So I'll tell you the exact website. It was onlinejobs.ph that I actually posted a job listing for a virtual assistant for. And I wrote the description of what I want, what I want them to do, and how I want them to operate, their job description. And all of a sudden, in the space of 3 days, I had 200 applications to go through. Their CVs, some people even sent videos, and I had to short them down to about 10 people that I got on a phone call and interview them from there on a Zoom call, and then narrowed it down to a handful that I actually employed for various tasks. But single-handedly, these VAs now have given me so much time on my plate to focus on the more important roles of the business. And these VAs are now working on guest communication daily, listing optimization in the descriptions with the photos, and they always have something to do. And it's very, very good to employ people to do something, especially if you can train them and they become better than you at doing the task. Because if you can motivate your employees and set it up in a structure whereby they're constantly wanting to do the best at their role, then that can really create a structure where your business will perform well. So, for example, every time we get a 5-star review on Airbnb or a 10-star review on Booking.com, my virtual assistant would receive £10 extra. And £10 obviously is not much for us, but in the Philippines, £10 goes a long way as a bonus. But also the amount of salary that we pay the employees in Philippines would be, let's say, £100 a week. And given the exchange rate, that is a proper hourly rate where they would be feeling motivated to work.
And I think I've met and actually I know for a fact that when I meet like massive CEOs or CEOs of little companies to even big companies, some of them get like stuck at a point when they can't grow anymore. And from an outsider looking in, I think it's quite obvious, because like even my dad like has the same problem of like delegating and like finding like people to replace jobs that they do that might not be like, as a CEO, like you have jobs to do, right? And we can both sit here and say certain jobs have way more importance than other jobs. And an important part of growing a business is being able to like take a step back and delegate these roles and having trust in your employees. I think a big part of why CEOs might not want to grow or might not want to, well, all companies want to grow, but they might not have that trust. And I think having trust in your employees is such a big thing, and it's so hard to find employees with trust, and it's something that you can't really figure out like in like one interview with a potential employee. It's something that sort of grows over time. Have you had like any experiences where, even in like your first job or what you're doing now, where you've sort of thought somebody was trustworthy and it turned out not to be, or have you never experienced something like that?
I once read this very good book. It was called From Good to Great. And they basically took all of the companies in the last 100 years that grew regardless of any economic downfall, and it takes and studies these companies and it boils it down to a few factors of why did that company grow more than other companies in the industry. And the study found that it hired the people that were already self-motivated. You could have the right person, but for the wrong role. So when you find an employee, you want to make sure that they're self-motivated and self-disciplined already. You don't want to train them on that aspect. So you could have, that's exactly what happened to me. You could have a role for a virtual assistant and someone overqualified comes in, he's the right employee and he's just not right for that role. So you will want to fit him in, and that's the right thing to do. You take on that employee and you find a good place for him in your company.
That's a good point. Yeah. I mean, when like a customer might like come into the business or even like an employee, if we talk about like employees again, and you need to like train an employee or you need to say, listen, like this is what you need to do, answer these questions, or you want them to source your properties and stuff like that. How do you go about like training the employee so that they do the job correctly? And do you ever find that like it will get to a point where hopefully those employees that you employ can then train future employees to scale your business even faster? I think that's a big point, is like using your employees to get more employees and for them to train the employees that you might obtain in the future. That's
100%. I think once you have a very good structure and a training structure and a training program for your employees, the job becomes easier, and the same employee could be in one company and grow and learn so much faster than be in another company and not grow at all and not learn anything. So I think it's very important to have the structures in place to train your employees. And for me, especially when I was once an employee, I found that I'd done the most learning when I was in the office, you know, when I was around like-minded people, when I was around all of the sales people and they were doing their calls, I was listening in, I was taking on information, writing notes, and that helped me to learn so much faster. So the best way I think to help your employees and train your employees is to spend more time with them. It is to tell them, okay, this is what I want, and this is how you can actually learn faster.
Yeah, and so like, for example, in the trading industry, a lot of things can go wrong. Like you take a lot of risk, like when you invest in certain things, if you don't have experience, and you always need to keep learning. You always need to keep adapting to certain scenarios. You know, you don't know what's around the corner with like these world events and wars going on. But like in the property space, is when you talk about like the aspect of keep wanting to learn and keep needing to learn, what do you need to sort of like stay on top of as the CEO of a property company? Like, is there any like certain subjects or topics that you always need to like keep involved in, or not really as such?
For me, I find that as a CEO, it's very important to know a little bit about all of the departments of the business. So even though I'm not an expert in the legal side, I should have some information about the regulations and the current economic climate of property. Similarly, with the accountancy side and the finances side, I should have an eye on the finances. And I would employ employees who are experts in their field, who have got qualifications, who have gone to university and know exactly what they're doing. But it's very important for me as a CEO to have an eye on everything, even if that's not going deep into the subject. And I find it's always very important to continuously be networking, continuously learning, and always have the glass half empty, because the second you think your glass is full, that's when everything will start to deteriorate.
Yeah, that's yeah. I mean, also, like, I had a little memory as well. I had a little flashback when you were talking about what you just said. And also, I wanted to touch on, like, a little story that you told me when you had a customer and they found a certain hair in the Airbnb. And I was wondering, like, how... Because people listening at home are going to encounter similar problems. Like, they're going to find certain scenarios if they do get into the Airbnb space where certain customers will complain, and some people just inevitably complain because they want money off. Some people will just complain because like they're unhappy with certain things, and some people complain because there's actually certain things that need to be addressed. So with that story, can we talk about like how that story happened and how you overcame the problem and fixed the issue at hand?
Recently was a guest checked into the property and sent an image of a pubic hair on the bed, and I'm thinking I have to alert my cleaner as soon as possible. And did this guest put this pubic hair there, or was it there in the first place? So thoroughly had to investigate the situation, but accordingly it's always best to treat the guest as though they're not lying. That's the ethical thing to do. So we sent our cleaner straight away, and they apologize to the guest. However, you do get guests that would plant the pubic hair there.
Yeah.
And, you know, whether it's from their places or not, then they would tell Airbnb, you know, this is the situation, and then Airbnb will deal with it accordingly. And obviously that is not part of their policy when it comes to cleanliness. So they would cancel the booking and things would take place, and you'd have to, you know, appeal the decision and provide evidence and have your report there of your cleaner taking a picture of everything having been done correctly, and then they can, you know, accuse the guest of not being transparent.
Yeah, because like even going into Hera and being the CEO, and even when I was running the Amazon FBA and eBay things, like I always had like experiences with customers where, you know, they're just being a little bit, you know, funny about certain situations, but you have to just take the whatever's going on as the customer's always correct. Like you can't say, like, from a seller standpoint on Amazon, you can't accuse the customer of lying, or you have to have a certain level of respect for that customer. And even as some extravagant situations may like happen, you always have to say the customer is in the right. And that's a big thing, especially if you guys are looking to get into any industry and be a CEO of any firm, or if you ever end up in a situation where you're dealing with a bit of a dodgy client or customer, the customer, unfortunately, is always correct, and that's one thing to know. But yeah, I mean, I think that's really good. I think we had a great conversation, and hopefully you guys learned a lot in this episode. And thank you again for coming on the podcast. And yeah, I'll see you in episode 3, guys, and maybe Hamza will be returning very soon, hopefully.
Yeah, definitely. It was a pleasure to be here.
Yeah,
I'd love to come back.